Let me ask you this. How have you furthered your goals yesterday? How about last week? How about last month? Let me ask you a different question. When you've heard me say that, what were the emotions that came to your mind? Were you content and satisfied? Or were you displeased and impatient? When I ask these questions of myself, it's a real mixed bag. Some days it's the contentment, and other days it is the dissatisfaction. But I've noticed a pattern in my life, and that is that when I follow my productivity system and the habits that I've built around it, I will usually look back on those days as the days of productive and effective work and furthering my own goals. Sometimes it doesn't look like work. It can be rest, it can be meditation, but going towards what I want in life. And the days where I don't do it are usually the days of discontentment. And zooming out, before I had a productivity system, it was mainly discontentment. And after I implemented it and started improving it, it got into more and more satisfaction. So if you're not 100% happy, it might be a symptom of simply not allocating your time to the things that are most important to you, or not being able to focus on the essential and having things slip through the cracks and having some important goals not being met because of the trivia of life. In either of those cases, getting started with a productivity system will significantly enhance the quality of your life. That, however, can be pretty cryptic and scary sometimes, and that is why I recorded this episode. Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth, the podcast that empowers you to earn self-esteem, build amazing relationships, and achieve freedom through radical personal development. I'm your host, Philip Frey, and today I will be reading out an article for you. This article has been published on valiantgrowth.com a few days ago, and it is titled, Go from Zero to a Fully Functional Productivity System Today, with Jake Desyllas. Now, if you've listened to the previous episode, you will know the interview that this article was based upon. Jake Desyllas is one of the most thoughtful thinkers on the question of productivity out there that I know of. And his podcast, The Voluntary Life, is one of the best resources that I know of. So, in our last episode, I invited him onto the show, and we had a great chat, but I've decided that I want to mine that conversation a little bit more. So, what I did is, I took clips from that interview, I took out the little bits that I consider to be the most insightful, what I consider to be the most concise way of putting things, and I wrote an article talking about the subject and giving a little bit more system, something that you cannot do so well in an interview, and enriching it with these audio clips. So if you go to Valiant Growth and you search for this article, you'll be able to read it as well as listen to these little clips. Well, in this episode, I've decided to read it out loud because it is a pretty long article. It's in about 20 minutes read, and I know very well that many podcast listeners are podcast listeners because they don't want to read long blog posts, and that includes myself. So I'm going to read it out, and I'm not going to include the clips because the clips you've already heard in the previous episode, and if not, you can just play that next. So here it goes. One of the most valuable time I have ever spent were the hours when, in my tiny and expensive London single room, waking up at 4 a.m. before work, I started to build my own productivity and goal setting systems, inspired by Brian Tracy's goals and Eat That Frog. It's funny to read back the goals I've set only 12 months ago. I clearly couldn't predict my growing interest in frugality, minimalism, and alternative lifestyle. Not BDSM. Not yet. At the time, which have made most of them feel quite obsolete by today. My actual day-to-day personal productivity system has changed a lot in a year or two, and has had its ups and downs along the road. What I most couldn't predict, however, is that the skill that I was building at the time, and still am, would lead to one of the most productive and creative periods of my life to date. And I show a picture in the article of my goal board from April, when in 20 days I recorded more than 10 podcasts and I released about 5. Well, that was the first time where my productivity system really came into life. Back to the article. Everybody has some form of productivity system and some kind of goals. The most basic one is keeping it all in your head, which does work to some extent, but at a great expense. Wouldn't you love not to have those, sorry, it slipped my mind conversations? Or remembering your New Year's resolution in November and realizing that you've made no progress? A more advanced level is the all too common combination of memory, post-it notes, reminders, a paper calendar, starred emails, a quote-unquote system that paradoxically is even worse at times. I've unloaded my memory, sure, but where did I put that note again? Heck, I wish I just tried to memorize everything. So, are you fed up with these little spikes of dissatisfaction and embarrassment? Have you had enough of being just a little bit afraid of what you may be forgetting right now, all the time? I thought you would be. I even thought you might want to build some time management, personal productivity, goal management, and overall self-leadership skills today. I've experienced the benefits of having a predictable system that I can trust, and I want to help you have it too. And that is why I contacted early retiree, author, and podcaster Jake Desyllas. Learn from the best. I consider Jake to be one of the most serious and passionate scholars of a conscious life out there. It's proven by the quality of the content at the Voluntary Life podcast, which is one of the best resources on the subject out there, and it's also proven by his resume. After leaving university, he built and sold a company in about a decade and at a price that enabled him to retire fast enough to be easily considered an early retiree. Then he launched his podcast at episode 268 at the time of reading this article, wrote a book about becoming an entrepreneur based on his experience, and then one where he systematized all the ways in which people retire early. And there are links here that you, of course, cannot see. So I've had episodes on both of these books. The first one is a review of Job Free, the book on early retirement, and that is episode 11. And then the second one is a talk on the subject of becoming an entrepreneur, the book about becoming an entrepreneur, and that is episode 34. Also, if you want to check out these books, an affiliate link is valiantgrowth.com/becoming and valiantgrowth.com/jobfree. I'll put all of these links in the show notes. So if you're the kind of person who reads the show notes, you will find them there. If not, jot them down somewhere if you're interested. Okay, let's get back to the article. In short, he's a guy who has a track record of taking productivity seriously, both in theory and in practice. And I have a picture of his own project management system, which is well worth checking out. I recommend just going to the article and looking at it. It's very complex and very well organized. We've talked about entrepreneurship previously at valiantgrowth.com/34. So this time I contacted him to talk about the entry level of productivity and goal setting systems. This article is based on that episode, and in fact this podcast is based on that article. The value of systems. You might be thinking, dude, I already have trouble getting anything going. What makes you think setting up this monumental system is really the best first step? And or, my plate is full enough already, why take all of this effort to think about doing things instead of actually doing them? I'll talk about how monumental getting started really is in the next chapter. But first, let's look at why Jake has devoted so much time and effort over the years to building, maintaining, and upgrading his system. And when I was talking to Jake in our interview, there's a very special moment. And you can hear that clip in the article, or it was also, of course, the previous episode, where he talks about why he is working on the system and why he's maintaining it and what it means to him. And that was an amazing moment in the interview. It felt really like I've struck gold, because he was saying, this is how I organize my life. This is how I organize my thinking. This is how I make it towards my own purpose. It's that important to me. The productivity system was, or is, that important to him. It is a central part of him living his philosophy, and that was very powerful. Back to the article. Having a system is more than a pedantic exercise in paper pushing. It might start looking that way, but it takes very little time for the true purpose to be revealed. Living a conscious life, organizing one's mind and thinking into a tool of empowerment, a tool for revealing and then living the highest values that one believes in. Productivity and goal-setting systems paradoxically clear your mind of the trivial by focusing on it, but just briefly. Only as long as it takes to get stuff out of your head, to review it, freeing your mind to think of your deepest passions without having constant annoying background voice reminding you not to forget the milk, paying those bills, making that call. This point often gets lost in all the technicalities of which book to read, which software to use, which podcast to follow, which technique to implement. It is, however, the true purpose of productivity systems. And when it comes to actually getting things done, the difference is enormous too. When asked about it, when asked what the difference would be if he could no longer use productivity systems, Jake put it as the difference between running a modern business with or without computers. I agree, except I think even that is an understatement. There were companies that ran, a lot less efficiently, sure, but still ran a paper system. These systems, however, have been, in my life, the difference between getting nothing or very little done to getting a lot done. More than I've ever thought possible. Sustainability is an area of growth for me, for sure, and for that you can see the gap in podcast release dates. But having tasted the nectar sure gives a massive boost of motivation for working on it. If you've experienced something similar, a similar jump, a similar boost in your own productivity, be sure to tell your story on facebook.com/valiantgrowth or in the comments section on the website to this podcast or the article. And I talk about the importance of respecting and embracing cyclicality, the seasons of productivity in episode 35, which is Valiant Growth /35 or E35. And it's also a part of episode 4 on procrastination, which is valiantgrowth.com/4. To do, set a simple productivity system up in a few minutes. Okay, but really, isn't it a lot of work setting up a system, requiring boatloads of willpower? You know, I have a friend who's got a label on every office item. Well, we'll get to that obsessive friend in the next section, but first, no, it really isn't that much work if you follow Jake's advice, which is to get everything out of your head, even if it's only on a piece of paper. You can set a low-maintenance paper system, also known as a notebook, by simply writing a list of what you need to do, checking it every morning, removing the obsolete, and adding new things in. It's as simple as that. Sure, it's not as cool as more advanced systems, or the latest, greatest, ultra productivity software 2.0, but simplicity may in fact be its core strength. The number one characteristic that you're looking for in your system is the ability to trust it. And you do that by having something that you fully understand, that is fully you. Remember when you first attempted to screw something in? Would you have been happier being given a manual screwdriver or a power drill? I still wake up in the middle of the night, bathed in cold sweat, haunted by the first time someone put that beast of a machine in my hands. Alternatively, you can use something like Google Drive Docs or Evernote if you prefer carrying your phone around rather than a notebook and a pencil. Whichever comes naturally to you is fine, because you'll be able to mix and match them later. So right now, I have Evernote and Drive and paper, but I only started with Drive. And if you're curious, what I do is I write notes down in Evernote because it's much faster and syncs better than any other solution. And then I organize things and I put bigger documents in Google Drive. And then I also have a backup paper system just in my pockets in case my phone is not charged or whatever happens. It's not polite to take out my phone. Then I can take notes, but I don't generally use it, but it is in my pockets just in case. A word of warning though, there are advantages to paper that you wouldn't think of at first. People are flattered if you pull up a notebook and write down notes as you speak to them. People are less flattered if you pull up your phone, even if they know that you're not really checking Facebook. And there we go, I'm spoiling the next paragraph in the previous one. That's what you don't get in an article. The three components of any successful productivity system. Jake identifies 3 steps to get a functional system going. Let's look at them in turn. Number 1, keep on getting things out of your head. After the previous section, your mind should be quite clear. You wrote down everything that you need to do right now. But here I come with unclean intentions and tell you that you should check out the Voluntary Life podcast, as it will be a great source of inspiration and encouragement in this journey, and you'll find it at thevoluntarylife.com. Now I've messed it up, since that little bit of information is rattling around in your head again. Sure, you can banish it by writing it down next to everything else. What if, however, you are away from your piece of paper or your digital file when I said it? Say you remember on your way to work that you need to buy milk tomorrow, or you should be booking a dental appointment 6 months from now. Do you want to juggle that around in your head for the next 6 months, or even for 8 hours until you get home? Jake and I would advise you not to, and this is why it's worth having a portable system on you at all times. It can be your phone, it can be a small pad and pen that you quote-unquote sync with your larger notebook later. The form is something that's personal to you. Just get something that you're already comfortable with. The real key goal here, however, is getting into the habit of emptying your mind as soon as possible, preferably in a limited number of containers, notepads, files, etc., so you can stay on top of it. Now, you might notice that things can get messy. Get milk being mixed up with goal, world domination by 2020, or with cool book Job Free at valiantgrove.com/jobfree. That's not ideal for sure, and you might want to start splitting them into things like a list of next actions, a calendar of tasks tied to a certain time, a waiting for list for the things you've passed on to others and need a reply, longer term projects, someday maybe lists about dreams, ideas, and plans that you're not going to work on right now, a list of goals and a list of references, information you cannot act on now but you might need in the future. All of this, however, is a next level step, and you don't have to take it now if you don't feel like doing it. In the interview, I share a story where one of my first bosses nudged me into unknowingly building my own productivity system. He was the owner of the company and quite a micromanager, and thus quite busy. As the marketing guy, I was directly under him, and he mostly shaped my task lists, but he didn't have the time to constantly check it up on me, so we talked for about 15-20 minutes every second or third day. Well, the first time he called me in, I valiantly showed up empty-handed in his office and started listening to his long list of ideas and projects that I would have to bring to fruition. And after nodding and saying, sure, I'll do that for about 15 minutes, his dissatisfaction piled up and he put an agenda into my hand telling me to write things down. I was, naturally, quite offended at the idea that I couldn't remember things, but I quickly recognized his wisdom after I forgot about 80% of what he said in a few days, and had to, with great resignation, rely on my notes. Our minds are great at recognizing patterns, but aren't that great at storing little pieces of information accurately. Anyway, my notes were a mixture of all sorts of actions, projects, goals, and references. I dealt with it at the time by marking important tasks with a star and a deadline. It wasn't ideal, sure, but it worked, and sometimes getting a simple and less efficient habit going is more valuable than getting some grandiose system not going. So you can find your own approach to marking what is important to you and then evolving as you go. But before we get there, step number 2, review it regularly. The tranquility of an unburdened mind can quickly turn into horror if you don't review your system regularly. You've set out on this journey to not forget things by storing and recalling them at the right time. Not to write things down and then forget them forever. The syndrome of finding ancient post-it notes and scraps of paper with great tasks and ideas forgotten along the way is overcome by A, having a centralized system, which you've already done, and B, building the habit of regular review. A very natural way of doing this is slotting it into your morning routine for the day and for the day-to-day stuff, and here I recommend checking out Chris Stefanik's work and his recommendations on a morning routine if you're building a new one, and a weekly or monthly checkup for projects, ideas, and other long-term goals. If you're new to the world of habit building, or if you just want some pointers around it, listen to episode number 5 at valiantgrowth.com/5, where I review and give links to a free, very good book on the subject. I've personally had the habit of devoting the last day of the month reviewing this month's goals and setting the next ones based on my core needs. More details on this in episode number 6, appropriately, which is at valiantgrowth.com/6. Then adding target deadlines for the month. Then printing it out on an A4 and looking at it every morning as part of my routine, and reviewing smaller tasks and goals written down during the day the next day before I start my work. A combination of these 4 practices alone did wonders for my productivity without taking that much time, other than on that particular day, the last of the month. Step number 3. So the first, let me just give you a reminder. The first one was get it out of your head. The second one was review it regularly. And the third and final one is organize it. In our interview, Jake stressed the fact that you must build a system that you can trust. A system that gets the information out of your head and then back into it at the right time. If you're putting all of this effort into it, but you're still missing things, what's the point, correct? Since we don't go into detail during the interview, what follows is my interpretation of what Jake meant by quote-unquote organize. Many tasks will be covered by a review, but in some cases, that review will either be overkill or not enough. For instance, while looking at your life goal every day can be argued for, and I even recommend it, what if you have a doctor's appointment in 2 weeks? There's absolutely no point in checking that 14 times before you actually get to the doctor's office. Or what if you got 3 appointments today, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one in the evening? Seeing it the first thing in the morning is good for planning your day, but you still have to keep a reminder ticking in your head about the exact times and places, which defeats the point of having a system altogether. Calendars and reminders are old news for people in sales, doctors, lawyers, and really most client-facing office jobs, or anywhere they have the dreaded meetings. They use it because they have to, but it's also a great tool for people with a less loaded schedule. I myself got into the habit of fully using them recently, and I wish I did earlier, and I do plan on recording an episode on this subject later. You can use the time-tested paper-based system here, but this is a place where digital really shines. Most calendar systems, iCalendar, Google Calendar, etc., have a built-in reminder and syncing system that you can really only recreate on paper if you have a secretary or if you check your agenda constantly. So what I mean by that is that if you use one of these systems and you put an appointment in, it doesn't matter where you did it, so it can be your computer, it can be your phone, it can be, I guess, your Apple Watch, I'm not sure. But yeah, you put it in anywhere and it will show up everywhere. That is the syncing bit. And then the other thing is you will get reminders everywhere if you wish to. For instance, in my case, when I have an appointment, my phone rings, has a little sound and says, "Yay, you have something in half an hour," and you can set that up on your own, the warning time. But also I get a little pop-up box from my Chrome browser. I use Google Calendar. And then also my email client has a calendar function built in, which is also synced. So that also gives me a warning. So it's a little bit redundant, but it makes sure that I don't miss things. So you can go digital, but you can also do paper. The choice is yours. This is one example of organizing your system, but on a more fundamental level, the idea is splitting information into different categories, as in the previous example, finding the right type of container for the job, finding the way of keeping the whole system in sync. And this gets us to evolving your system. How much and in what way you make your system better depends very much on your needs and personality. The greatest gain is going from no system to having a system, and after that every improvement faces diminishing returns. Great gains early on, more cool tweaks later on. Some people have ran large companies for decades with simple paper-based systems and see no reason to change. Others will take pleasure in making something as smooth and well-oiled as possible, going from convenience and saving time to works of art. And again, if you check Jake's diagram, you will understand what I'm talking about. Some approaches, such as David Allen's Getting Things Done, find it at valiantgrowth.com/GTD, work better for some people, while others, such as The Power of Less, valiantgrowth.com/Power of Less, are preferred by people with different needs. Growth is a beautiful thing, and I take pleasure looking at it and looking at the various strategies that people choose. The only risk here is being overwhelmed by a leap that's too great compared to your existing systems. I had this with GTD, which I'm very happy to have read, but honestly wish to have read later. I've seen it happen with others too. There's so much to the book. There's so much that it asks of you that it easily goes into the, oh, I'll do it someday territory. I tried to make the transition a little smoother for you by smuggling some ideas from it into this article and now podcast. Shield yourself by seeing advanced techniques for what they are, an optional improvement for the right people at the right time. Embrace them if you wish, when it makes sense, but there is no right way. And for a little bit of a bonus content, a dash of goal management. I think that all areas of personal development are interconnected, and it's at least natural, if not necessary, to learn and grow in many parallel fields roughly at the same time. Hence the wide range of subjects tackled in Valiant Growth. This is especially true of time and goal management, a beautiful marriage of how and why. So I would have been remiss if I didn't include this question in our discussion. We all have goals, dreams, and plans, but like everything else, bringing consciousness to the field through having a system is the real game changer. Here are some actionable first steps towards building your first goal management system. Separate your areas of responsibility. In the eMyth Revisited at valiantgrowth.com/eMyth, Michael Gerber advises small businesses, and especially small business owners, to draw up an organization chart of the company with all the key roles: CEO, Director of Operations, Director of Sales, Director of Finances, and fill in their own names in each box if necessary. This might seem redundant, but it is done to ensure that no key responsibilities are overlooked, that diverse goals can be set up, and that when there's time to outsource, the role and the responsibilities are already defined and there's already some experience built around them. In a very similar way, we are in charge of our own life. A one-man company with the singular focus of fulfilling our own needs, which also involves others. And it's too easy to miss areas. Almost all crisis moments in life arise when a neglected aspect comes to the forefront. Physical fitness, finances, family, mental health, etc. And it can be ignored no more. That is why a great way of looking at goals is to start by splitting up areas of responsibility and setting goals within each separate field. Where do I want my income to be in 1 year? Where do I want to take my relationships? How fit and healthy do I wish to be, etc. And my friend / ally Nick Hazelton at the Anarcho-Yactals podcast has made an episode teaching you to mind map using exactly this same example of areas of responsibility if you need help with that. I also outline a slightly different, complementary approach of starting from core needs in episode 6 of Valiant Growth. And episode 6 is valiantgrowth.com/6. And you can find Nick's mind mapping episode at and-yak.com and search for mind mapping. 3 core goals: breakthrough versus maintenance. More is not always better, and that's true with goals as well. The previous exercise can easily lead to a list of 15 plus goals if you were comprehensive. And yet, Jake talks of focusing on 3 core goals, 3 big wins. That makes a lot of sense, given that the human mind is not particularly capable of splitting focus and attention in too many directions over too long a time. So how do we square this circle? An idea that I find useful is separating goals into breakthrough and maintenance goals. When habits are formed, it's not too difficult to do many dissimilar things in a sequence, as long as they are familiar to the point of not requiring a lot of willpower or attention. As I mentioned in episode 5, think brushing your teeth, taking the dog out, washing the dishes, etc. You could do that all day and not care. It's not too difficult to pile on simple goals where you're doing things you've already figured out in the past. I call these maintenance goals. They only require habituation and the maintenance of your routines. For example, I'm not too worried of tacking on the goal of having a lean food budget onto my other goals. It's a way of thinking that I've put effort into previously and that doesn't require a lot of willpower to maintain, as long as I don't want to make further strides and improvements. And you can learn more about my $2 a day food budget in episode 14 at valiantgrowth.com/14. This article is really bringing together the resources. I've become so used to this way of thinking that, in fact, I have a very hard time not immediately calculating calories per British pound or dollar or whatever in the store when I look at a piece of food or whatever. I'm comfortable having numerous maintenance goals, and thus making sure that no area of responsibility is neglected. I may wish to upgrade my systems at some point, but right now I'm happy to maintain what I already have in these fields. On the other hand, managing my own time and exercising self-leadership in my life is a breakthrough goal that I have right now. I find it very challenging to stay productive, shape my own goals, and to be a friend and a mentor to myself on a level of consistency that satisfies me, and to at the same time also be acceptive of the cycles of life, as I talk of in episode 35 at valiantgrowth.com/35. This is an area that's very important to me, where I want to up my game. I'm not comfortable having too many breakthrough goals at the same time, because that very rarely works. On the other hand, for an entrepreneur with decades of experience, self-leadership and consistency might be a walk in the park maintenance type goal. Milestones versus feeding your unconscious. A common step advised in many books, such as the one you can find at valiantgrowth.com/goals, is to then take these big goals and break them down into more frequent milestones. Objective achieved/not achieved questions that you can use to check yourself against. I found that to be a very helpful and actionable methodology in my own life. An interesting complementary or maybe even alternative approach that came up during an interview with Jake is being clear of your goals, feeding your unconscious. So if you are clear on your goals, that will start seeping into your thinking, and you automatically will get new angles, ideas, and sub-goals during the month, and it usually happens in the shower. And then you can update your milestones, and/or you can simply let these new ideas flow organically into the smaller daily tasks that you set for yourself anyways. So you may choose to completely forego these sub-goals depending on your personality and what works for you, and I found that very interesting. Introducing a habit of checking your monthly goals regularly, say daily, and your larger visions and larger goals, say weekly or even daily, and getting all of this into your morning routine can go a long way into harnessing the full power of your mind. And you will be trading capacity for sure. You might lose some witty Facebook updates, some good singers, but you'll be working on things that matter the most to you, and you'll be putting your unconscious to that task. So just do it. Some fruits are low-hanging, but then there are fruits that are so low they might as well be underground. And in researching this article, I found out that peanuts are actually considered to be fruits. So it's peanuts. It's perfect. So, last episode, episode 42, that is what I got from it. Getting started with productivity is not as complicated as many people think, and it is extremely rewarding. All you need is a pen and a paper and some alone time. In fact, you can build an entry-level system by simply following the steps outlined in this episode, which may be a little bit hard for audio, but that is exactly why I put together the article. So you can just go to valiantgrowth.com and go through the steps and just do it. You don't need anything else. So maybe turn off your Wi-Fi and start right now. Now, if you want help and inspiration, you may want a more detailed guide. And in that case, I recommend checking out the previously mentioned goals at valiantgrowth.com/goals and Eat That Frog at valiantgrowth.com/eatthatfrog, no spaces, combination, both books by Brian Tracy. That was actually my first step, and you can't really go wrong with it. And it's a good combo, especially because goals covers goal management, and Eat That Frog is a more day-to-day time/task management idea and book. If you're confident that you can pull through a larger project and want something more systematic, you can also start with getting things done at valiantgrowth.com/GTD. Be aware, however, that starting there is risky, as mentioned previously. You wouldn't be the first person to be overwhelmed by it. If you would like support and coaching in this process, feel free to send me an email to philip@valiantgrowth.com. And when it comes to evolving your system, the Voluntary Life podcast at thevoluntarylife.com is the best resource that I know of out there, and you will definitely find a lot of value and more advanced perspectives and techniques in the hundreds of episodes there. Now, this focus on productivity will not end with today's episode, and even this series will not end with today's episode. So if you do this, you're gonna have some time to do this. I'll give you a little bit of time to get going, and then hopefully pretty soon we will be releasing level 2 of my intro to productivity systems, where we'll go through more advanced techniques. So you might very well benefit from getting started right now. So when that comes out, you'll be ripe and ready for a little improvement and increased efficiency. Thank you for listening to Valiant Growth, and I dare you to flourish today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it. Growth is my goal with this podcast, and I love it when you can help out with that. Thank you.